There was one piece of advice that really sticks out. You always have to ruthlessly prioritize. And it wasn't just the prioritization, it was the ruthlessly prioritize. That adjective that associated with it really stuck with me. You have to realize the human elements here, that you can't do everything all at once. And that's something that I've always kept with me.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. Let's face it, running the entire compliance operations of financial institutions is no walk in the park. You're running a team working diligently to keep customers safe, managing expectations of ambitious CEOs and founders, keeping across new regulation and sanctions, all the while trying to stay one step ahead of criminals looking to clean their dirty money through your service. If you think this role is for everyone, think again.
What would you know about pressure?
I'm your host, Marit, CEO of Strise, and in this episode, we are asking, what does it really take to be a chief compliance officer? I'm here with a guest who knows these pressures well, and we will be discussing what does the role of Chief Compliance Officer look like today? What are the biggest challenges that causes sleepless nights? And in the world of automation and growing global conflict, what does this role look like in the future? To dive into this topic, I'm here with Mitch Trehan, Chief Compliance Officer at Allica Bank. Welcome to The Laundry, Mitch.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Can you tell our listeners about you, your background, and Allica Bank?
Yes, of course, happy to. And thanks again. So I've been in financial services, particularly in compliance and related fields, for about 22 years now. But prior to that, I actually signed up and joined the Air Force. So originally I was training to be a pilot in the Air Force, but I got an injury in one of my eyes and that stopped me flying. So I had to look for a new career. I studied law at uni, as many people in compliance have done. And I applied for a job at Citibank and I fell into compliance originally as a paralegal and then went into that. So I've done all the larger firms, Citi, Barclays, JP Morgan. And then about 8 to 10 years ago, I started realizing that these super tanker firms, if you really want to try and maneuver and make a difference and do things quicker, and the rise of fintech at that time as well, maybe I should look into that. So I moved into fintech firms and I've spent my last 4 roles in last 8-9 years going through various fintech firms at Ebury, Banking Circle, and now at Allica Bank. And at the same time, I've also done quite a bit of industry work. So for a few years, I was the chair of UK Finance's Interbank Payment Policy Committee. I am on the advisory board of the Payments Association, which is one of the largest trade bodies for payment firms in the United Kingdom. I also sit on the executive committee of the Association of Foreign Exchange and Payment Companies. So through different guises, I really got a lot of touch points across the industry, which, is actually a lot of fun and you get to meet a lot of people.
Then we have something in common because I also just fell into compliance, to say it like that. So fun to hear that there's more of us.
Nice.
But thank you for the introduction. Let's dive in. I wanted to start with a question. Just why do you get out of bed in the morning to be a chief compliance officer?
That's a really interesting question. There's all the cliche types of answers about doing this, doing that, and talking about the fundamentals of the job and what I do. But for me, it's not actually about that. I've managed myself to connect emotionally with what I do, and that comes from me about caring about things. So if I look all the way back when people used to ask me, why did you join the Air Force? It was more about, if you care about something, then you do naturally what you need to do to protect it. And that's always been a key attribute for me when deciding which firm to go to, who to work with, and why to work with them. So for me, I really need to care about the company, the product, and the customers. And if I've got those aspects, I naturally feel like it's my role and duty to protect it. And that stems all the way back, like I said, from the military background. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I absolutely love Allica, what we're trying to achieve. We're making things better across society at large for these established businesses that, quite frankly, have been underserved for so long. I care about that mission. I care about making things better there. And because I care about it, I want to protect it. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
And what does a typical day look like for you?
It's typically meetings. A lot of it is meetings with the business, meetings with other persons across the leadership team, and meeting with people in my teams. We have to address queries that come up in as much of a real time as possible a lot of the time. And it's knowing then what to delegate, what to keep, and what to do. And then ensuring we're getting all of that handled, reported, kept in a way that on our monthly committee meetings, we can put that back up to the CEO and on up into the committee. So a typical day is meetings, addressing queries, making notes and recording what's been happening so that I can collate it all at the end of the month to provide assurance upwards.
And how much of that work reacting to queries is proactive versus reactive? Things just come your way and you have to deal with it there and then.
I would say at the moment, it's about 50-50, right? So there is a number of parts where the business is moving, it's engaging, it's going forward, it's developing new products, it's understanding what we can do for particular client types. Those you cannot be completely proactive on. You can set up policies, procedures, and governance structures. So a lot of that will be reactive. But then, of course, there's the other aspects of it where we do have the proactive pieces, where we're looking at specific reporting metrics regarding onboarding and payments and transaction monitoring, where we can go and provide a check, challenge, and learn. And that would be a proactive side. So I would say all in all, it's around 50-50 at this point in time.
Are there any of the latest reactive things that you could share with our listeners? Just out of curiosity.
I guess one of the key attributes that we've been looking at reactively is as we're supporting established businesses, we have a societal purpose in everything that we do. That's a key fundamental attribute of our risk appetite policy, and it's on our website and everything like that. And that societal purpose runs through everything we do. But of course, there's other opportunities in other sectors with what's happening in the global stage about whether or not certain companies are ones that should be supported or not. And I know I'm alluding to the point and I haven't got there yet, so let me get into the specifics. A lot of banks out there have a zero tolerance for anything to do with defense, offense, military, or anything like that. However, given the state of the world at large, and also given my own personal background, there has been opportunities where clients have proactively reached out to Allica saying, we work in the defense sector. And it's only defense. We do nothing about offensive weapons. We do not do anything that causes harm, but we do produce and manufacture pure defensive aspects. And our clients are predominantly the United Kingdom or strong allies of the United Kingdom. Would you be able to support us? So for something like that, that's a reactive thing that's just landed on my desk. And I have to evaluate, well, what is the appetite of Allica? How do I feel about this from a societal purpose? What are the risks associated with doing something like that, and how do we unpick it? What controls could we have in place if we are indeed to recommend to the wider leadership team that perhaps this is something we should or should not do? And that's a very recent case where a firm had come to us looking for that support, and we had to make a judgment call as to whether or not it was within our appetite.
Interesting, and thank you so much for sharing so openly. In the beginning, you mentioned a lot of your former workplaces that are really reputable, big organizations. What was the best piece of advice you learned from senior people there when you were starting out your career?
There was one piece of advice that really, really sticks out. His advice was, you always have to ruthlessly prioritize. And it wasn't just a prioritization that was a phrase. It was the ruthlessly prioritize. That adjective that associated with it really, really stuck with me. And it's so true, right? Because there's so many things you can prioritize, and there's so many things that will come across that are at least medium or high risk residually. But you have to realize the human elements here, that you can't do everything all at once. And if you look at all the books and all the reports and everything that's coming out from Amazon and all these other large firms that have grown massively, they all talk about that part, about knowing what to say no to, about knowing where to focus. And I've learned and connected those dots as I've gone through my career. But this was at Barclays many, many years ago. And that leader he said, for the entire team, it wasn't a specific thing that he and I had this chat, but his message to the entire team was always to ruthlessly prioritize. And that's something that I've always kept with me.
So ruthless prioritization. Besides that, what are some of the other key characteristics that you think that you have that's important when you are a chief compliance officer?
I think the next most important piece is ensuring that the staffing and knowledge within a department is correct and appropriate. And while staffing is always a key for any leader of any department anywhere, one of the key parts of a compliance team is we aren't single focus. We will be supporting operations one day, product another day, financial crime teams another day, lending products, payment products, bank account products. But we're still a second line of defense team, which means we aren't the ones doing the do. We are the ones that have to provide oversight, advice, assurance. So one of the key parts for that is ensuring that you've got the right mix within your team and looking ahead, how is the firm growing and what will the team need to look like? And also checking everybody's own unconscious bias. And that again is a leadership aspect, not just a part of a compliance team, but making sure you're hiring people that have that diversity of knowledge, that diversity of thought, that diversity of experience is extremely vital when building a fully functioning compliance team. Because the key attribute here again is you're not one team dealing with one other department. You're one team that has to know the entire organization. And that is really, really tricky when you've got a team of 10, 15, 20 people to have that can face off to the entire bank in a meaningful advisory type aspect. That's always going to be the key part to get right for any chief compliance officer. And then post that, it's going to be about the delegation, knowing what to delegate, how to delegate, to whom to delegate, and when you expect information to come back up. That's also a really, really key part, because there's always, and I may go off on a bit of a tangent here, but there's always a conflict between delegation and oversight, or delegation but come to me. And I've seen this go wrong in other firms. And here's another piece of advice I was given many years ago. If you can look at things in a mathematical way, how confident are you in the advice or the decision you're about to give somebody? If you are 75, 80% convinced that this is the right answer, I've always said, take it. Take the decision, run with it. You can give that advice. If it is somewhere between 60 and 75, 55, 75, that sort of arena, soundboard it with a colleague, soundboard it with your line manager. Just get another bit of advice and say, I'm going to do this. What do you think? And then if it's ever 55% or below, that is going to cause real conflict. Something about your knowledge base or your experience or whatever it might be that is preventing you from making that decision. And actually, with the way a team should work, you shouldn't be in that position where you're spending so much time to try and figure out what the right answer is. That to me is pass it on. Just pass it up the chain and go, I'm not content. I'm 50-50 on these two. Can you please take this over, take the decision and come back to me? And I feel that works, and it's okay because you've given parameters. It's not, here, I'm not going to do any work. I'm going to hand it to somebody else. It's, I'm empowered to make this decision at these levels. I should check in at these levels, and I'm empowered to let go and hand it over to somebody else so that I can actually feel comfortable and having fun in my day-to-day job. And I'm not bound down with this conflict that I don't know necessarily how to handle. So it's advising and teaching people in a team for me, and that's how you build good compliance teams.
And I'm really curious to know, what is it like a typical situation that would keep you up at night, that causes a sleepless night for a chief compliance officer?
Sleepless night. I mean, you're usually exhausted, so I sleep quite well, right? It's a busy role. It's got to be about coming back to ruthless prioritization. Sometimes you're wondering, those things that I've deprioritized, have I done that correctly? What should I be doing? And it's rechecking and re-reviewing and re-evaluating those prioritizations. You can't just have a prioritization once and then say, I'm never going to look at it again. So those pieces are going to keep me up at night. But looking at it from a wider attribute or a wider way, I would say right now, the piece that's keeping me up at night is APP fraud. So authorized push payment fraud and the new regulatory requirements that are coming through for that. Again, for those that aren't aware, in October this year, there is going to be new requirements upon payment service providers, whereby if your customer is the victim of authorized push payment fraud, you're required to refund them up to £415,000. But that is split between the remitting bank or the remitting institution, because it's not just banks, and the beneficiary institution. How can you ensure that we are managing the risk of that for our customers, but also for our own firm, while at the same time not introducing unpalatable friction for customers? Because payments still need to move, businesses still need to make those payments. We don't want to have impacts to working capital where all payments have slowed down for days while things are getting reviewed. That for me is a key challenge in keeping me up at night, because I want to do that right. I don't want people to be the victim of push payment fraud. At the same time, I don't want our firm to start having these claims against it to repay large sums of money, because that would be detrimental to any firm. So that's a key example of one thing that is prioritized and is keeping me up at night.
In today's fast-paced world, financial crime can occur in mere minutes or even seconds. But what if you could spend just 15 minutes learning how to more effectively stop it? Prepare yourself and your company for the future of AML with the Q from Strise. Join us for a 15-minute live stream. In this high-speed pit stop, you can find out about constantly updated AML data that meets all current and future regulations, features that slash the manual tasks that bog down your AML team, making your operations smoother and more efficient, and a product solution that solves the crucial problem of scattered and disconnected AML data. Join us online on Thursday, June 20th at 11 a.m. Central European Time. Find the link in the episode show notes now and don't miss out. So you mentioned APP fraud, and in a sense, Chief Compliance Officer, you are constantly in direct competition with criminal gangs, money launderer, fraudsters, terrorists, and other bad actors. So APP fraud is one of the threats, but how do you keep up with all the growing threats?
Truthfully, it's almost impossible, right? And I know maybe that's a bad thing to say, but there are more bad guys and criminals out there than there are compliance people within institutions. And that's always going to be the way. And a compliance person is within one institution, whereas a criminal will be attempting to, infiltrate many institutions at once. So we are constantly in direct competition, and keeping up with growing threats. For me, it's about keeping your finger on the pulse by speaking and having a good network. I mentioned before about the different associations that I'm part of. They do hold a number of cross-industry, cross-personnel, cross-firm meetings, and having that network of people for me is key. And also not just having that network, but actually agreeing with persons. I have a WhatsApp group with a number of chief compliance officers on it. And we all say, right, this is coming up, this is coming up, this is coming up. I say, I will look at this. They say they'll look at that. Somebody else will look at something else. And then we will meet up after work one day and we'll chat through what we're learning, what we're doing. We don't talk about anything specific for our organizations, of course, but it is sharing that knowledge and having a trusted group of people that you can share that knowledge with and get knowledge back from. So there's constantly growing threats. Keeping your finger on the pulse is not easy. There is so much information out there constantly. My reply is you need to have a group of trusted persons within your team and across the industry that can look at this and just naturally communicate with you so that you can start addressing them.
Just back to the risks again. I'm not sure if you're able to share, but what is something that you as a chief compliance officer had to say no to because you felt it posed a too big risk? And then I mean like a new product or a customer group or something where you said, no, this doesn't work for us. The risk, we don't have that big of a risk appetite.
So there's been nothing so far at Allica. I can say there hasn't been anything. I've been here 4 months. I'm reflecting now on my prior firms where I've said no and done that. No is a very controversial answer, actually, and that hasn't typically been my approach because I'm not skirting the question, so stick with me here. Should an answer from a compliance officer ever actually be straight out no? Unless it's something illegal, do we as second line of defense, are we supposed to say no? What I've typically done in certain scenarios is always advised, if a business has a new product or a customer segment or anything that it might be, my evaluation on it will be, if you wish to do this, you need to consider a control or a way to explain to me how you've addressed this point, that point, the other point. For example, and it's not even a really great example, but in prior firms where we've done a lot of correspondent banking is where your customer is another financial institution. And underneath that financial institution, there are other customers. And indeed, there could be another financial institution beneath that downstream who then has customers. And you get further and further away from the end remitter and the end beneficiary. Whenever those types of customers or structures or setups have been proposed, my answer couldn't just turn around and be, no, that's too much risk. It's going to be, the risk here is what controls are in place between each of those firms to ensure that the eventual remitter or eventual beneficiary whose funds will be going through the plumbing of our bank is indeed a good actor. How can you prove that and evidence it satisfactorily that in the event of any challenge when something went wrong, you can say, this is how we believed everything was okay. So as you can see there, a number of compliance officers, a number of the firms would say, no, outside of appetite. When you flip the question and go, it can be an appetite, but you need to implement this control, that control, and the other control. This is how you do it. They then have the challenge or the request of, is the cost to serve model in this scenario now worth it? Because we can do this type of business. We now have identified the risks. And as a result of that, we know what risks we need to address and how we can control it. Is the cost of controlling it going to still be commercially viable? And is it something we want to do in a small scale or a big scale? Because that's the other part. Often people say, oh, we just want to do it as this one-off or that one-off. The control environment's the same. Sometimes you get economies of scale, so you go and you do something largely. So I guess that would be an area where I would say I haven't necessarily had to say no. But what I have had to do is say, you need to stop and check that you've got the satisfactory controls in place to do this task, client segment, whatever it might be, in a compliant and safe way.
Talking about the cost of control, we are now in a time of rapid evolution when it comes to technology development. There's AI, there's all these pieces that come together. How do you see maybe AI in particular impacting your role going forward? And I guess secondly, do you think that AI will help bringing down the cost of controls for firms so they are able to perhaps expand products, customer segments, all of these things, while also being compliant and catching criminals?
It's always all about AI these days, right? So there's two distinct questions there, Marit. Let me go to the first one about what will the impact be, if I remember correctly. What will the impact be, or what impact will AI have on a compliance department? And then we'll go into the cost of control separate, right? So for me, AI is actually a very valuable tool. AI takes large amounts of data and can provide it back to you in a meaningful summary, in a good way that can give you the mood music, give you the steer, give you the essence of the regulation. The problem, however, with AI is what data points you allow to be fed into it. So AI, obviously, if you've got a controlled AI, that will be, I could ask it a question and it will only get its answers or its sources for its answers from specific predefined agreed sources, then I think it's a very, very valuable and very powerful tool because it reduces the time of analysis or summarization or even trying to find something within regulation. This will find it for you and give you some of the key attributes, which you can then use to go and figure something else out. But one key takeaway here is, there's all this talk about the chief AI compliance officer and this starting for startups, etc. I don't see that particularly working post the startup phase, because all AI does is provide you with information. AI correlates information with what it's already seen and provides back to you. It doesn't make judgments. It doesn't actually know from experience what proportionality would look like for your business. Not today anyway. And how you would ever get to that stage of correctly judgmental, proportionate AI responses, I still think we're many, many years away from that.
How do you think a compliance department will look in 2030? Let's assume the development of AI continues at its speed, new technologies, etc. How do you envision a team looking in 2030?
I don't imagine them to look too different other than size. I think what's been happening lately is pendulums shift. So there's two parts of when I talk about size as well. One's going to be the AI piece, which I'll bring back in. And the other part is going to be the pendulum. So I'm going to start at the pendulum. Over many, many years, the pendulum shifts from not enough of a second line to loads of people in the second line to swinging back to, maybe we've taken it too far, not enough people. But that pendulum will eventually start stabilizing in the middle. And I'm actually genuinely believing that for a lot of firms, the pendulum's landing in the right place. It's starting to not have those swings anymore, but thereabouts getting to the right place, because the 3 lines of defense model, which it's not new, but it's not exactly old, right? That's really starting to solidify now where people in the first line are realizing they own the risk, they take the risks. And with the senior managers regime in the UK, those individual accountabilities where they particularly have the risk and have to make that decision means that first line business owners, first line accountable executives are having people in that first line to give that advice, to manage the risk and to control it, which then means compliance departments are really focusing on what is the oversight, what is the advice we need to give, what is the assurance we need to provide to the board and the CEO, and how do we meaningfully report that? And actually really focusing on those definitive parts of the second line means that all the people in second line historically that were the doers, that's all transitioning back to first line. So compliance departments in the future, I see them as having persons in the second line with the right capacity to really just do oversight, metrics, providing assurance, doing the check challenge, providing the advice and reporting it upwards, and doing less of the day-to-day doing, because that's all now naturally falling within the first line in the accountable executive under the senior manager regime. And then the next piece of that part of the question you mentioned, I said I'll come back to, is about AI. AI is going to provide better metrics, better reporting, and better analysis of finding outliers within payments, which in of itself will reduce manual oversight and manual workthroughs, which again, I believe will have a cost save. And the reporting that will come out of AI should naturally mean that you can then design it in a way that it's already designed for success. You can see those results and you can see month on month, week on week, what is the delta, what is the movement, and where do you need to focus? I see those as the key ways that the compliance officer and compliance department's roles are going to evolve.
I like that analysis. And I mean, at Strise, we truly do believe in the automation aspect as well. You can automate what should be automated so that you could spend people's time on the more challenging tasks and staying in the loop rather than doing all the manual pieces yourself. So your analysis resonates a lot with me. But before we end this episode, I want to dish out some quick fire questions for you. Are you ready?
I hope so. Let's go for it.
What are the 3 attributes which all chief compliance officer need?
Move quickly, mental resilience, and I couldn't end this without saying the ability to ruthlessly prioritize.
What is the most important duty of a chief compliance officer?
Reporting and communication. I think a lot of times I've seen historically people don't communicate what they've found, or they don't provide it in a report, and there's no documentation or tangible evidence of it. So the most important duty, no matter what you do, is that audit trail and reporting and communication.
What is the biggest challenge in combating money laundering and financial crime today?
Criminals are always the ones that start it and are proactive. Compliance departments are always going to be reactive to that. And the biggest challenge in combating anything to that is you're always a bit on the back foot, and data moves so quickly, and criminals are even getting access to large amounts of data now where they can make so much analysis. So I think the biggest challenge in money laundering financial crime today is just the ability to use our own internal data of any firm in competition with the data that the criminals have.
Finish the sentence. If I wasn't working in compliance, I would be
making cocktails as a mixologist.
And with that brings the spin of the laundry to an end. Mitch, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
Yes, of course. I am happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. Please just drop me a note, mention that you've heard me on this podcast. I will happily connect. And, if we work close together or close by or anything, I'm always around the City of London. Happy to meet up.
Money makes the world go round.
And thanks to everyone who was listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out the back catalog and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. We'd also love for you to share the podcast on your social media channels, tell your colleagues about it, drop an episode in a WhatsApp group chat. It really helps people to find us. Got a story you think deserves the laundry treatment? You can comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email thelaundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit. Our producer was Matthew. Our engineers were Dominic and Nicholas. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud. Your data problem and your workflow problem, now it isn't your problem. Visit strise.ai for more information. See you next time.
Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round.